Thanks for joining us on the I-24 News desk at this hour. Rocket attacks continuing today already from both the south and the north. Hamas launching a short time ago a volley of rockets from Gaza towards Israel, and Hezbollah attacking Israel from the north today with mortar fire, rockets, and also apparently drones too. On the ground, the battles deep inside Gaza continue to intensify. The IDF this morning announcing the deaths of 2 more soldiers killed in action. That's 7 IDF soldiers killed in battle over just the last 2 days fighting Hamas terrorists. This is new video just released from the IDF of elite combat forces operating deep inside Gaza, aiming to locate and destroy underground tunnel shafts and other infrastructure belonging to Hamas. About 36 tunnel shafts were located and destroyed in the upscale Rimal neighborhood already, according to the IDF. Prime Minister Netanyahu says that the small amount of daily humanitarian aid and fuel delivery to the Strip is critical to maintaining U.S. and global support as the war goes on.
Israel abides by the laws of war. That's how our army works. The most moral army in the world. Humanitarian aid is also vital to maintain international support. Without humanitarian aid, even our best friends will find it difficult to support us over time, and it will be very difficult for us to continue the war until the end.
With us now is I-24 News senior defense correspondent Jonathan Regev. Jonathan, the IDF today releasing several clips of new video showing some of their most elite battle-tested units operating inside Gaza, searching for tunnel shafts. And they've uncovered dozens of them in some of the more upscale neighborhoods, the upscale parts where middle-class Gazan families live, the Rimal neighborhood, uncovering and destroying a lot of terror infrastructure. What do you make, perhaps, of that new announcement, of the discovery of these tunnels, and what it means in the broader picture?
And guess, Jeff, who else used to live at the Rimal neighborhood? Of course, the Hamas officials. They're the upper class of Gaza, so that's where they live. The Rimal neighborhood, they had no problem putting their own neighbors in danger, building digging tunnels, and having tunnel shafts right on their own neighborhood and right underneath them in the most upscale neighborhood of the city, ammunition and headquarters and so on, showing that once again the civilian population is the one that pays the price. Everybody, they take their own neighbors as their human shields. This is what Hamas is doing. This is how they operate wherever they are, whether it's their homes, other neighborhoods. They bring on ammunition and everything else, putting the civilian population in danger.
Jonathan, the Israeli defense establishment saying that the damage and destruction, the IDF efforts to root out terror infrastructure in the north will soon be seen in the south. The campaign will soon turn to the south. Can you give any insight perhaps on how the south might look different than the north as the battle unfolds? Many Hamas commanders, many hostages perhaps, are now in the south of Gaza, not in the north, where the IDF is running.
Yes, and it will be a more challenging task, considering the fact that the IDF will have to deal with many more civilians. Hundreds of thousands of civilians fled from the north to the south, and then if you invade the south, you're going to encounter them one way or another. So there are specific refugee areas that are set up for them, but eventually you're going to meet all these people. It's going to be extremely challenging.
Jonathan Regev for us in the south of Israel. Thank you so much for that report. Let's also talk with retired Commander Dr. Eyal Pinko, who joins us now as well. Thank you so much for being with us, sir. I want to ask your thoughts on the battles inside Gaza. Unfortunately, sadly, a very high death toll from among IDF soldiers in just the last 2 days alone. But they are uncovering more tunnels, more shafts, dozens of them. How many more tunnels could there be to uncover? How much more intensive can the effort be to find hostages maybe in the tunnels, to find terror commanders like Mohammed Deif or Sinwar himself in this labyrinth of tunnel structures underneath the ground?
Yeah. First, unfortunately, in the last 2 days, 8 soldiers were killed. This is a very crucial war, and it's being done in a very condensed urban area, which, as you said, it's not only above the ground, but it's also below the ground. And in each building there are explosives and ambushes that are being done by Hamas. So this is the reason that the IDF, when it comes forward, it's using first artillery from the sea, artillery from the ground, and also aircrafts to uncover whatever is possible to uncover from the buildings and from the infrastructure, which is with explosives. So in this way, I think, when the IDF entered the battle, the estimation was of hundreds of soldiers to be killed. And we see that now it's much, much less. It's a lot, but it's much, much less than was estimated. So I think the IDF is operated very slowly in a way that will promote the issue that as less as soldiers will be died. And I think it's the act is very good. As for the below ground or the tunnel system, Hamas has a tunnel system that goes up to 70 or 80 meters below the ground level, which is very, very deep. It's with several layers. It's a whole city below ground. The estimation was that there is more than 1,500 different types of tunnels over there, which are running through all the cities from the Egyptian border in the south to the northern border with Israel. And it's a huge network of tunnels. The IDF is using a lot of technologies in order to fight inside the tunnels that are covered or being detected with robots and drones and some other measures in order not to go inside, because the IDF understands that also inside the tunnels there are a lot of explosives and ambushes that can be discovered over there. So the issue is to go with technologies, robots, drones, to identify if there are any kind of explosives, and then one by one. And we don't know where you asked about Sinwar and all the top commands of Hamas. We don't know where they are, I believe. So only fighting day by day, tunnel by tunnel, we can reveal what will be over there.
Eyal, all of the civilians in the north have been told to go to the southern part of the Gaza Strip, to a particular area in South Gaza. Perhaps up to 1 million civilians have fled south. How does the IDF proceed in the southern part of Gaza and still protect civilian lives? What's the plan to battle Hamas in the south when there are millions of civilians in a very small area now?
Yes. It's a very complicated issue. It's a very, very complicated, because not only there are civilians that are waiting in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, but it's also, we understand that among those civilians, there are Hamas operators as well, Hamas terrorists as well. So how you identify who is an innocent guy and who is Hamas? It's very difficult. When you go to the south, you have over there refugee camps. Once again, it's a very, very condensed urban area. So the complexity of the war of fighting over there become much harder than in the northern part. And the IDF will have to deal with that, not to hurt and not to harm civilians, to identify who is Hamas and who is civilian, and once again to go below and above ground with all the ambushes and the explosive that Hamas prepared over there. It's going to be a very complex days, even weeks maybe, yeah, it's a huge challenge there.
Definitely a big challenge, sir. Thank you so much for being with us here on I-24 News and for your analysis on the battles to come. And let's go now live to the north of Israel. I'm joined by I-24 News correspondent Robert Swift near the Israel-Lebanon border, where there have been frequent attacks today so far already from Hezbollah. What kinds of attacks have we seen from Hezbollah, and has there been a response from the IDF?
So throughout the day, we've seen a mixed use of weapons by Hezbollah. They started out with mortar fire first thing in the morning, but that appears to have progressed onto the use of drones and possibly also rocket attacks. We have had some sirens, although no confirmations with regards to that. The IDF has responded using artillery in the morning in regards to the mortar fire, and also using airstrikes on a number of occasions throughout the day. Now, just half an hour ago, there was another a possible incident, a possible attack. This one taking place in the far eastern end of Israel's northern border, around the kibbutz Mizgav Am. This was rocket sirens that went off. Now, this could possibly be indication that the village has been attacked with either mortar or rocket fire. That village has been attacked in the past weeks with that kind of weapon system, but it could also be a response to the launch of an Israeli interceptor missile. Just to the north of there, earlier today, we saw two villages where that occurred. Rocket sirens went off, but it was actually in response to the Israeli military firing a missile to intercept a drone that Hezbollah appeared to be trying to send across the border. At the minute, we don't have confirmation on this, but like you do say, like you have said, there has been a number of attacks. This incident I just described would be the 6th security incident to have taken place today. That means so far today we've had roughly about the same number of attacks that took place during the whole of yesterday. So as we've talked about before on the channel, some days are busier on this northern border, other days are quieter, and despite the or possibly because of the heavy cloud cover and the rainfall today, it seems that today is one of those busier days so far.
Robert Swift, thank you so much for that live update on the north. U.S. President Joe Biden is making clear that he wants to see some kind of international coalition temporarily rule the Gaza Strip. Biden also says he eventually wants a revitalized Palestinian Authority to return to power in Gaza, with a long-term goal still a two-state solution. Prime Minister Netanyahu says the PA must be overhauled before Israel could even consider allowing them to return to governance in Gaza.
I think that the Palestinian Authority in its current form is unable to accept responsibility over Gaza. After we fought in Gaza and did all we did, will we hand it over to them? Abbas, 43 days after the most terrible massacre of the Jews since the Holocaust, still refuses to condemn it. His senior ministers are celebrating what happened. His authority pays the killers and their families. You know very well how they educate their children. If there is no change in this matter, then what have we done?
With me now is Fatah activist Samer Sinijlawa. Samer, thanks so much for being with us and giving us your perspective here. U.S. President Biden says the Palestinian Authority needs to be revitalized. Do you agree?
Well, this has been Palestinian demands since 15 years ago. President Abbas was elected in 2005 for a term of 4 years, and then he continued to self-employ himself as the president until today. Polls has shown that 75 to 80% of the Palestinian people are requesting from Abbas to resign, and they are calling for national elections. And I think that Abbas most powerfully has determined the destiny of destruction that is facing Gaza now. When he canceled the election in 2021, if he could have allowed this election, we could have had a more moderate government that is governing both the West Bank and Gaza, and maybe we could have evaded this destiny. The scale of destruction in Gaza is massive, and there should be some kind of a Palestinian after-war math, where we should determine who has been responsible into pushing Gaza into this destiny. And it is Abbas. It's on his shoulder. He has been blocking the unity between Gaza and the West Bank. He has been blocking democracy. He has been blocking elections. And he is imposing more and more authoritarian regime over the Palestinians. He brought corruption to the West Bank, and he brought destruction to Gaza.
But Samer, you're talking about
it's time for him to leave.
You mentioned a few times the importance of having elections, and it's 15, 16 years now into a 4-year term. If there are elections, what makes you so sure that Hamas wouldn't win an election, or that a more extreme group win an election? Hamas is very popular across parts of the West Bank. What makes you think that someone that Fatah or a more moderate element would win an election?
Well, I'll tell you something. Hamas has been able to gain support from the street because their strategy does not need a partner. They declare violence, they declare military resistance, and they can implement the strategy alone. While Fatah has been losing support from the street because its strategy, depending on negotiations and diplomacy and political paths, depends on a partner, which is Israel. And, Israel apparently since 2009 didn't want to pursue political options. I'll tell you something. The Palestinian people is very much desperate for hope. When somebody comes, apparently the need of change in leadership is not only going to happen after the war on the Palestinian side. Apparently the Israelis also, they are going to do some after-war methods and bring a new leadership. If both leadership are able to offer the Palestinians some hope, people will vote for hope. Palestinian people is looking for a better future, for prosperity, for justice, for security, for peace. By nature, we are looking for positive development in our life. We are the only people that are so sure that tomorrow is worse than today. If somebody comes, a leadership that is transparent, accountable, a representative of the people, elected by the people, and finds the Israeli partner, and finds the endorsement of the international community, including the statement of President Biden, where he said we should have a new Palestinian leadership that also leads towards development to achieve a political solution. Under this equation, the Palestinians massively will endorse this, will elect and vote for peace and for positive political development.
But for now, Sameh, there's no. I want to make sure I have your assessment here. For now, there are no elections, no election date, no elections scheduled. For now, and we know Mahmoud Abbas is almost 90 years old. If there is no succession plan, if there is no known successor to Abbas, what happens the day after Abbas to the Palestinian Authority and the possibility of governing in Gaza? If there is no election, there's no plan. What would happen in the West Bank and Gaza?
Well, if Abbas does not want voluntarily to leave the political scene, now after the cruel position of the American president, well, it's a demand, first of all, from the Palestinian public, and now it's the international community also that are demanding him to do some compromises. If he does not want to do it voluntarily, if he does not want to leave the scene, we need to force him to do so. If it is not directly towards elections now, and I think with the circumstances in Gaza, it will be very difficult to organize elections, but at least we should have some kind of an acceptable, non-corrupt government now, a unified government of national unity where the opposition of Fatah are there, the independent national political figures are there, decent people are there that can manage the situation until we have elections in 1 or 2 years when life comes back to Gaza, because you cannot hold elections only in the West Bank and you cannot hold elections now in Gaza under this level of destruction. Gaza needs some time until it brings life back to its population, and you need reconstruction, you need to organize a little bit how people are going to live under such harsh conditions. So it's the international community now that should push this, taking into consideration that in 2002 it was the American Condoleezza Rice at that time and President Bush who pushed Arafat to allow a government led by Abbas himself and pass all the authority to Abbas. So we have an example in our history. In 2002, they can do the same exercise now. They need to convince the 90 years old man that it's time for him to leave, and he needs to give all the authority to a government that is acceptable by the Palestinian and by the international community. Who is going to do the reconstruction in Gaza? This corrupt government? Nobody will trust her.
Yeah. Samer, thank you so much for your analysis, giving us your insight on I-24 News, activist with Fatah. Thank you so much for being with us. Back here in studio, I'm joined by I-24 News senior correspondent Owen Alterman. Owen.
Fascinating conversation. By the way, we're going to see a lot of argument what that word revitalized means,
exactly.
right?
So I want to get your take on it. Samer saying it was a first step, revitalized. He's interpreting it as as meaning Abbas cannot be in power anymore. I think that's certainly a fair assessment of what maybe was hinted at only by Biden. He's saying, Samer, as an activist within the Palestinian with politics, there needs to be more specific calls from the international community saying the name Abbas needs to resign, Abbas needs to go. What do you make of that?
Well, listen, again, Joe Biden, in a sense, closed a debate here in Israel when he used that adjective revitalized in his op-ed, right? The debate about to what extent he disagrees with Benjamin Netanyahu. But he also opened another debate. What does that word revitalized mean? It means one thing to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he's been very clear about what that means, right? The end of the pay-for-slay policy, deep changes to the education system in the Palestinian Authority, clear voices of condemnation for terrorism from the leadership of the authority. So that's what Netanyahu means. But Samer has a different view on what revitalized means. Again, speaking from someone who comes from within the Palestinian public who has a different set of priorities. And it's going to be left to Joe Biden and the Biden administration to try to please everybody, okay? And there are points of common cause, right? The idea that Abu Mazen needs to pass from the scene is, I think, something on which both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Samer and maybe President Biden would all agree. So you're right. Maybe the idea of there being a new leadership is actually a point of agreement.
But who would oversee elections? Who would administer elections? This doesn't seem to be in the cards for 16 years now, several times announced and canceled.
Right. Would Benjamin Netanyahu want elections, right? Because as you correctly asked, Jeff, who's going to be able to stand in those elections? Who's going to win those elections, right? Samer has this vision of a government of national unity, which presumably would include Hamas as part of the leadership of the Palestinian Authority. That's obviously a non-starter for Israel, right? But he also talks about the idea of rooting out corruption. One would imagine that this could be a point of common cause for all of the parties. Again, if such a government would have more credibility among Palestinians, that could also be an Israeli interest as well. So this is all going to be negotiated, right? And not only negotiated between the United States and Israel, but also negotiated between the United States, Israel, and Palestinians as well. But I do suspect that Israel is absolutely going to stick to its red lines, that Hamas not be included, that voices calling for the elimination of Israel, for the murder of Jews, as Netanyahu said, not be included, for there to be deep changes to the way terrorists and terrorist families, for that matter, are approached by the Palestinian governing structure, and, of course, deep changes to the education system. I don't think Israel's going to back down on those. And Israel's going to essentially be in control of the territory in Gaza. So Israel's going to have leverage to make sure that those red lines are met.
And then we want to make sure Israel has announced that we will, when we need, be able to enter and exit the Strip for security purposes. We will have a security presence indefinitely as long as we need for security reasons. Whoever eventually is in charge of the Gaza Strip will accede to those demands. There will be some kind of cooperation. As Samer alluded to, it has to be a new generation that will allow this to happen.
Yeah, but you know what? I didn't hear Samer actually rule out that concept of Israel having the ability for freedom of action for the military in Gaza. I didn't hear that, which is interesting. I guess what I'm trying to say is there may be room for negotiation among these different points of view to come to some kind of agreement on at least a large part of the issues. But of course, there are going to still be some points that are going to be hotly contested, especially this idea of a government of national unity, right? Which sounds in Palestinian ears like a point of consensus and reconciliation, but to Israeli ears sounds very, very different, right? Even before October 7th, let alone afterwards. So again, and are Palestinians going to be willing, given what we see in polls of Palestinian public opinion, to really root out the incitement against Israel that we reportedly see in the education system in a way that satisfies the Israeli public? So there are going to be some points that are going to be hotly contested, but don't lose sight of the points on which there could maybe be a surprising amount of agreement.
Very interesting insight here on I-24 News. I want to note, Owen, something that happened just in the last few minutes, confirmation from the Emir of Qatar, the Qatari Prime Minister, confirming that there is the final details being ironed out at some kind of hostage release deal, hostages being released in exchange for a multi-day ceasefire. The Premier of Qatar saying that the Hamas Hamas and Israel, only a few final details left to be worked out. They're very close together. They may soon happen. We don't have any details, and nor we may not until it's actually announced publicly or brought before a vote before the War Cabinet. But it appears this may happen in the hours, if not the days to come.
Right. Joseph Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief, making the pilgrimage to Qatar, right, and being there with the Qatari prime minister. The prime minister, I don't know, Jeff, that he got into the details of the deal, as you said. What he did say is there are only minor details left to be resolved, and they're especially, quote, logistical difficulties. So it's either an accurate statement of the state of affairs or it's spin. Right? And the Qataris have an incentive to try to present this deal as being almost done. Why? It enhances their stature. They're, in a sense, a mediator here, right? So they have every reason to try to push the idea that the deal is almost done. It obviously reflects well on them. And also spin in the sense that they may see it as being a way that puts pressure on the Israeli leadership by in a sense, dangling this in front of the hostages' families, and in that way having the pressure redound on the Israeli leadership. I actually think the situation in Israel is much more complicated in terms of the way the public looks at this. But never mind, the Qataris, from their perspective, may see it. And again, getting a joint podium with the foreign policy chief of the European Union, Jeff, again remains to be seen on the other side of this hostage deal, on the other side of the war, in which Qatar hosted and hosts in the present tense, as far as we understand it, key political leaders of Hamas, but Qatar was not able to deliver the goods, right? Why were they hosting those leaders? To be able to restrain Hamas on the Day of Judgment. It didn't work. It didn't happen, calling into question the whole strategy of enabling Qatar from the outside to do this.
Yeah.
So this is their day in the sun when they have the leverage to get the hostage deal done. We'll see what happens after the war.
Oh, and thank you so much for that analysis. We're going out for a short break. More live team coverage from the north and the south of Israel as the war wages on. More updates straight ahead. Stay with us on I-24 News.
Good afternoon and welcome to I-24 News' ongoing coverage of Israel at war. I'm Ariel Levin-Waldman. The Air Force is stepping up its strikes in North Gaza as fighting expands on the ground. Overnight, fighter jets struck many Hamas targets inside the Gaza Strip, towns of Jabalia, Beit Lahia, and Gaza City's Zaytun neighborhood. IDF recovered stashes of weapons from residential buildings, which is further proof of Hamas hiding within the civilian population and using human shields in their war against Israel. The military announced the deaths of 5 more soldiers killed in action in North Gaza, bringing the total to 60 in the south. On the northern front, action against Hezbollah continues to escalate, and the Northern Terror Group expands the intensity of operations. Hezbollah attacking Israel from the north with rockets, mortar fire, and drones as well. At least one of these Hezbollah drones was shot down on the northern border by the IDF. A total of 8 soldiers have fallen fighting in the north since the beginning of this war. Qatar's prime minister said a deal for an immediate ceasefire in return for the release of some hostages is close, and that all sides see eye to eye on the details. This comes after both Israel and the United States say reports of a hostage deal are very premature, and Netanyahu says as of now there is no such deal.
Regarding the deal, we are prevented from discussing the details of the conditions that we adhere to. We want everyone back. If we do it in a step or two, we will do it in such a way that we want to bring whole families together. It's clear as the sun. We want categories released together. This is also clear as the sun. I don't want to say beyond that, but that's what we want. It is hard. It is a cruel and cynical enemy which has no limitations. Within these limitations, we work and do the best we can.
And we're going to turn our eye to Israel's northern border, where our correspondent Robert Swift is standing by in the north. Robert, can you give us what the latest developments on that front are?
Yeah, so just 15 minutes ago, the community of Shlomit rocket sirens went off there. That's at the far western end of Israel's northern border. So far, we haven't been updated on what's caused the rocket siren there, although that village was fired upon with mortars earlier this morning. Now, also at about the same time, slightly further to the east, but still west of where we are, there was an additional community at Amit. There's a report there that there's been an anti-tank missile attack. We're looking for confirmation on this story now. If confirmed, those would be the 7th and the 8th security incidents to take place today. We've seen attacks right along the border, and in fact, I can actually just hear the from the west of us, I can hear what sounds like Israeli artillery fire that's likely responding to one or both of the two incidents I described to you. So as I was saying, yeah, we've seen attacks right along the border from the west all the way to the east. There's been a number of incidents, mortar fire in the morning, rockets a little later, but also a number of occasions we've seen what appear to have been drones attempting to infiltrate into Israeli airspace, with one drone apparently shot down in the far northeastern end of the border.
Well, Rob, we're going to come back to you as we get some confirmation on some of those events that you just mentioned. Those are developing stories that we don't actually have a clear picture of, but we will hopefully have some more details later. For more, though, we are joined here in studio by Neri Zilber, adjunct fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Neri, it's always good to have you with us. We have seen a sharp increase in Hezbollah activity over the course of the past day. What's emboldened them to be so much more out in the open about it?
Well, this is really from the first day of the war with Gaza that Hezbollah has joined in a very active way. If we had been talking about this, say, 2 months ago, Israel would already be at war with Hezbollah. This is far and away the deadliest escalation between Israel and Hezbollah since the 2006 war between the two old foes. And so now what we have really over the past month and a half during wartime in Gaza is a war situation, not a full-blown war, but a war situation in the northern border on the Israel-Lebanon frontier, still very much contained to northern Israel and southern Lebanon, but the risk with each passing day and each passing Hezbollah attack, as the correspondent mentioned up north, it's been 6 to 8 attacks just today, that one of these attacks will be quite deadly. The Israeli forces will retaliate, and that in and of itself could escalate into a broader conflict.
We're not going to go into exact details because there's very unconfirmed reports filtering through Arabic media right now about what's going on in the north. But what sort of attack are we looking at that would be a trigger condition for the war in the north going from low intensity to all out?
So you're looking at major casualties, especially on the Israeli side, or further rocket fire deeper into Israel. So right now, with a few exceptions targeting Haifa and Haifa Bay, the rocket fire has essentially been contained to northern Israel, really along the band a few kilometers wide from the Lebanon border south into Israel, but also a mass casualty event. Several fatalities, either Israeli forces or civilians still on the northern border. That in and of itself would require Israel to escalate further, again, beyond southern Lebanon, deeper, more widespread attacks against Hezbollah, perhaps up to and including Beirut.
And we're going to continue this in a brief moment, but first we are going to take a look at the southern border. Our senior defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, is standing by at the Israel-Gaza border. I believe you are in Sderot right now, Jonathan. Can you walk us through what the most recent developments on the southern front are? We're hearing new reports of heavy casualties in Gaza.
Yes, heavy casualties in Gaza, unfortunately, on both fronts. As the Israeli army has announced in the last hour that 3 more soldiers have been killed. But yes, heavy casualties in Gaza. We've been hearing today, we were in Sderot, and very heavy artillery can be heard. This due to the fact that the main fighting today is taking place in neighborhoods such as Jabalia, such as Sajaiya. They are on the eastern front, on the eastern side of Gaza City, meaning quite close to the Israeli border, and the sound of the artillery could be heard very well from the Israeli side of the border, from Sderot, which is very close to that area. And this was the Israeli tactic, first encircling the city of Gaza, the entire northern half of the Gaza Strip, and then neighborhood by neighborhood come in and take away every capability that Hamas has, terrorists, ammunition, headquarters, you name it. And the main fighting today is taking place in those eastern outskirts of Gaza City.
You mentioned some of the very heavy fighting going on there, Jonathan. Is there any indication that the weather conditions today are causing difficulties for Israel's close air support?
I don't think so. Yes, it is windy and it is cloudy, certainly much more than it was in previous weeks. But the Israeli army certainly has the ability to fight under these conditions. It's not a hurricane or anything of the kind, but it is very windy, especially cloudy, but not something that should stop the IDF.
Well, that's a good sign for the forces on the ground, Jonathan. We will come back to you over the course of the day as that situation down there develops. We are going to return to the studio where we have Neri Zilbert with us still to assess the situation in the south as well. We're seeing these reports of heavier casualties on the ground as Israel expands operations across certain parts of Gaza City. Ultimately, what has been accomplished over the last 24 hours that we know of, and what's left to do in the northern parts of Gaza?
So a lot left to do in northern Gaza, and we should be clear. The IDF ground campaign has focused exclusively on northern Gaza, deep into the heart of Gaza City, as you mentioned, but now expanding both north and eastwards back to what are perceived to be Hamas strongholds like Jabalia, which was hit very hard a few weeks ago from the air, and the Zaytun neighborhood. So this is, I believe, the reason for the heavier IDF casualties in recent days, since really the weekend, that IDF forces are now, for the first time in a real way, going in like they went in into the northern neighborhoods of the Gaza Strip, as well as the heart of Gaza City, going in and finding either Hamas operatives, Hamas infrastructure, going in and essentially clearing out these neighborhoods for the first time in a big way. And it's of a piece with the wider spread of the IDF ground campaign to include the entirety of the northern Gaza Strip. The idea is that you want to hold that area and clear it out before you shift in a real way possibly to the southern Gaza Strip, which, as we all know, was the area now that's holding the bulk of the Gazan population after the IDF called for the residents of the northern Gaza Strip to move southward over the past month and a half.
This expansion in neighborhoods like Zaytun and Jabalia, is this going to be more of the same that we've seen over the past month, or is this going to be a different game entirely? Is it different sort of fortifications and different kinds of bunkers?
No, I believe it's going to be more of the same because Hamas, as we all know now and as it's becoming clear since the IDF moved in, has built up a massive military infrastructure in the heart of every Gaza neighborhood, arguably in every Gazan house. And it could be an apartment block, it could be a school, it could be a hospital, both above ground and below ground. And so in order to get to these places, especially the underground tunnels, you have to physically be there, you have to physically send in forces, and then handle especially the underground infrastructure. So that's what we're seeing now. It's more of a piece than what we've seen now since the ground campaign started, 3 or 4 weeks ago. So it's going to be heavy sledding, slow and methodical is what IDF officers are calling this operation. But as of now, it's been relatively successful in getting to the heart of Gaza City in a relatively short period of time, and the casualties notwithstanding, going in and actually taking out the Hamas military infrastructure in the Gaza Strip.
One of the things that we have seen, as you just mentioned yourself, is finding weapons in every single house, every single residential apartment, just about every possible room being a death trap or set up to be one. Ultimately, how is Israel supposed to clear every single place in Gaza, given just how extensive Hamas's infrastructure is?
So I don't know if they're going to have to go to every single house and every single room in the Gaza Strip, but the hubs that were, before this war, major points of emphasis for Hamas itself. And I want to emphasize this again, the tunnels, right? That it's one thing to strike or even go in and seize above ground apartments or complexes, but the underground tunnels as of yet have not been that hardly touched by the IDF. In other words, there's still a lot of work to be done, and IDF officers are very clear about that. They're trying out new methods that so far have not been made public in terms of actually going in either with human forces or robotic forces or even canine forces to actually go in and figure out what's underground, and then finding a new technological way to actually neutralize these tunnels. That's still a work in progress, but that will be a major point of emphasis in the coming weeks and arguably months.
And I'm just going to break in here because we're getting initial reports of rocket alerts in the Kisufim region as well. So definitely has not stopped the ability to fire just yet. We were mentioning the tunnel system because that's been the big one. And we hear a lot of hope for a technological solution, but at the same time, we're hearing they have not made very major destruction of the tunnels just yet. Are they going in there with just hopes and prayers, or is there actually a method here?
So there is a method. It just hasn't been explained publicly. By the way, not even to the Israeli media and the military correspondents. To the best of my understanding, and I spoke to someone about this late last week, the government and the military are throwing massive resources at this issue, at this problem, because we have to remember that's where Hamas leadership is. That's where the Hamas operatives are. Arguably tens of thousands of Hamas members and their families are underground, and the hostages are likely, for the most part, below ground. So in order to meet the objectives set for this war, for this campaign, you're going to have to go in and either take care or neutralize these tunnels. How you do it, that's a really good question. Again, to the best of my understanding, there are various means that are being explored, technological and also other means. It's also been mentioned to me personally that prior methods that the IDF used to neutralize these tunnels, whether from the air or from the ground, have not been as successful this time. So the thinking is that Hamas actually prepared further these underground bunkers and tunnels and really underground cities for an IDF onslaught. The IDF is working through that problem right now.
Let's hope they find some success there. Now, we're going to get a little bit more widespread in our look next. More specific and detailed reactions from Arab leaders about the war in Gaza. Alongside their reactions to Israel's operation, there's also their thoughts on the Hamas terror group. Let's take a listen.
I condemn Hamas unequivocally. This is so everybody in the room can understand that I stand on the side of civilians and innocents and not on the side of political posturing. The attacks on October 7th were barbaric. I unequivocally condemn the air campaign that resulted in the death of over 11,000 people in Gaza, 4,700 of which are children.
And let me just make clear, as the Crown Prince said yesterday, I condemn Hamas's barbaric attack on civilians on October 7th. But I must also condemn the equally barbaric and more savage attack of the Israelis on Palestinian civilians, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank.
And we're going to return to the studio with Neri Zilber here, because we just heard some Bahraini reactions. Seemed like a lot of equivocating there, condemning Hamas with half a sentence, then going on to call Israel even more barbaric. These are ultimately the Abraham Accords nations, and I guess Israel has to ask the question, how useful have these accords been when it comes down to making friends in the region, if friends like these issue condemnations like that?
So it's not that surprising. These governments, despite not being exactly democracies, are still susceptible and also responsive to public opinion. And public opinion in the Middle East and the Arab world is obviously heavily tilted against Israel. It has been for decades, and especially now, since the outbreak of war, heavily tilted against Israel and arguably pro-Hamas. Now, if you ask these officials from these Arab countries what they actually think about Hamas in closed doors, I think you'd get a very different answer in terms of the threat Hamas poses, not just to Israel, but regionally, in terms of both its actual militant activities and its ideology. The Muslim Brotherhood is not exactly welcome in a place like Saudi Arabia or Bahrain. They're major enemies of both governments and both regimes, and so we have to take what they say, these leaders and other diplomats in the region, whether, by the way, also Jordan and Egypt, long-standing peace treaties with Israel. Their leaders haven't exactly been falling over themselves to condemn Hamas or to stand by Israel. And again, that's of a piece with their own publics and where their public stands, so they're actually quite nervous about their own positions. Their own chair is shaky due to the events of the past month and a half. But obviously, we'd all like to see a bit more moral clarity, what their position will be and how this war actually started, which was a vicious Hamas attack on southern Israel, while at the same time taking into account that public opinion, while you may not agree with it, coming out of the Arab world, and by the way, not just the Arab world, also the Western world, you may not agree with it, you may have strong opinions against it, you have to take it into account, because as Prime Minister Netanyahu said last night, Israel needs time to prosecute this war, to achieve the war aims that it laid out, and time equals international legitimacy. International legitimacy in many places, even the Middle East, requires public opinion.